Welcome to episode 6 of the Leading Complexity video podcast. This is where we explore the art of leading organization in today's complex, hyper-competitive landscape. In each episode, we will explore cutting-edge strategies with some of the foremost thinkers in leadership. Join us and discover how to make your organization thrive and lead in a constantly evolving world. My name is Tomas and with me I have Michael Göte.
Yes, in this episode, we will listen to a very interesting conversation we had with Gary Hamel. He's one of the world's most influential iconoclastic business thinkers. He's the author of many books, and the last one is called Humanocracy. But first, Thomas, we had some reflections from last episode where we interviewed Woody Zul on the concept of teaming. Teaming when he talked about more than one person working on the same thing in the same space. So true collaboration. And Thomas, you had some reflections about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the interesting with doing those episodes is that afterwards it's in my mind, it's being there, it's being processed, and then I come up with a lot of things. I think it's the same for you. But to start with, I'm thinking of this with team building. What do you think about team building? You know, where you a couple of people, you go together to climb a mountain or solve something out in the forest.
Yes, of course, that's a good way to get to know each other, but it doesn't really directly translate to work. So you might learn things and you might get to know each other better, but then you have to kind of take it back to work. So I think it's more effective actually doing work together, collaborating, and then reflecting on that. So you kind of build your team as you're working.
Yeah, I think it's the same. Just let the people get some hard problem to solve together. I think that is the building the team much better than normal team building.
Yeah.
And
Woody talked about actually doing the work together. It's not very common. His experience was that people talked about teams a lot, but he didn't see that they were on any team. People came together to talk about the work, which is not the same as doing the work together. That's not really teaming or a real team.
yeah, and I've also seen the same in books from Amy Edmondson and Richard Hackman, for instance, who's also been researching, studying teams a lot. But there are more things I was reflecting on from last episode. And for instance, Woody, he mentioned that he preferred to do puzzle solving by himself. But I was thinking there is a difference between different puzzles. For instance, if we take Sudoku, in Sudoku, you need to have about one competence, and that is some sort of logic or patterns to figure out which number should be where. But if we talk about crossword puzzles, then it's very good to have different competences together, like someone who's very good at chemistry. There are always those, what is letters for this and that. There is also someone who's good at celebrities or geography, and having them coming together, I think, will help crossword puzzle solving a lot. And this kind of gives us the idea of complementary skills. We mentioned last episode that what we want to have is the people that have the best information about the problem or the need, and secondly, the people that can actually do the work, and thirdly, the people that can take the decisions, and get them in the same room. This can sound like a lot of people to get in the same room, but what I was thinking is, if you are sitting here listening to this thinking that, wow, that would be a lot of people, we can't have them in the room together, probably that is because you're working with the wrong operating system. If we go for another operating system like the empowered product teams, where the team have all the competences needed and they also have the right to take the decisions, then suddenly you are down to maybe 5 to 9 people, which is the normal team size.
Yeah, at least I think I would say like 5 to 9 as a core team, and then you might need some more perspectives now and then. And if you use the concept of teaming that we talked about, those people can come in and kind of join the teaming and then go out again when they're not needed. So kind of flow in and out a bit. But you can have 5 to 9 people as a core team being responsible for the whole idea, the whole value creation, if you really empower them. But of course, if you have a traditional setup with lots of functions, yeah, you need to have one person from every function, maybe, then you would have to put a really large group together. So yeah, how you structure the kind of operating system, how you set up the prerequisites for the team is key.
Yeah. Maybe we are using some words that not is common for everyone to understand, like the operating system. What is the operating system here? It's not like Windows or Mac OS, right?
But I think we mentioned it a bit. It's kind of the setup of the organization that we refer to it as the operating system, the kind of paradigm of how you see the organization and how you set up the structures and the culture, etc. And if I remember correctly, Gary Hamel also talks about this paradigm shift that is needed.
Yeah, he does. And empower product teams then.
Uh,
Where is that coming from?
Yeah, so in terms empowered product teams are teams that are responsible for solving problems. So they have the full kind of scope of and the ability to take decisions, and they have all the competence needed to go from kind of ID to value creation at the user.
Yeah. And I also would like to add this idea of zero distance to the customer. So they are really sitting in the lap of the customer, understanding the customer much better, either by data or by having deep interviews or being very clear, close to them, or in best of cases, they are the customers themselves.
Yeah, I think most companies talked about customer focus, but this is kind of taking it to the next level. You have feedback loops with the customer or user included in that feedback loop. So really, really, really tight collaboration there with users.
Yeah. Something else I was thinking of was that Woody is mentioning this, that when you are teaming, really working together, then it's much easier to keep your focus longer. And I didn't really react on it when he said it, but afterwards I was thinking, yes, that's quite obvious because there are a couple of things here. First of all, when you are teaming, when everyone around you are working on the same thing, that means that something is happening, and that's fun to see. You see progress. So that gives you energy, which makes it easier to keep focus. But another thing is, if you're sitting with your thing and people around you are working on different things, then obviously you hear what they are talking about, and that is distracting you. Or even they are asking you questions about other things that is, again, distracting. So by focusing and having a lot of people sitting around you, and a lot of people, we're talking about maybe about up to 9 people, as we mentioned before, but they are focusing on the same thing, that will lower the amount of distraction, and it's more fun and more energetic. So that helps you keep your focus longer.
Another topic related to teaming that is current is hybrid work, and yeah, it's still very a current topic. So when it comes to hybrid, what I see, most people that are working remote are kind of working by themselves a lot, or they, as Woody said, they meet to talk about the work. So they're not really doing the work together. Of course, teaming, you can do it together. So by video, creating the space, etc., collaborating remotely works really good, but I don't see most doing that. And if you want to have creativity, taking all those perspectives, it's not enough to meet and talk about the work. You actually need to work together. So I think if people are going to continue working remotely and hybrid, they need to learn the teaming skills. Otherwise, it's I think more and more will come back to the office as well to actually collaborate. What do you think?
Absolutely, I agree with you. And Woody was mentioning that it's not about being in the same space, like physical space. It could be just being together, which could be online as well. But the importance is to do the work together.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's time to start talking about the guest of today, Gary Hamel. Um,
Yeah,
how do
Thomas.
you know him?
Uh, well, I read the book, The Future of Management. It came out already in 2007, I think, but yeah, I didn't read it until 10 or 11 or something like that. But that was, yeah, really, really influential and shifted the paradigm of how management is built. And the fact that management today is still kind of influenced from 100 years ago, how it looked like then, and hasn't been really reinvented. So that book is still current, but yeah, Gary has done lots of books and talks since then. So I followed him since that time. How about you?
Yeah, I become a fan of him when I saw the video that is on YouTube, and I think it's called something like "Reinventing Management," as you say. But when I Googled it, I also saw another title, "Reinventing the Technology of Human Accomplishment," and it really changed a lot for me. I saw the world in a different way and started to challenge what I saw was a normal way of running a company. Lately, he released the book Humanocracy, which I also think is really interesting, saying that today we need to build an organization for humans.
Yes, let's have a look at the interview we had recently with Gary.
Okay, so today with us we have Gary Hamel, well known for a lot of books, and the latest, Humanocracy, is really great. Highly recommend it. And it's very much about new management. Well, Gary, in your work, you argue against bureaucracy. For instance, you have pointed out the paradox where individuals are trusted to make major personal investments, like purchasing a home, but not uh, when they are at the office. They need the manager's approval just to buy something cheap. Um, I could argue that bureaucracy stems from the fear of losing control, particularly over finance resources. How can we design a system that provides high levels of autonomy while ensuring that resources are not misused?
That's a great question, Thomas. First of all, I think you have to realize that bureaucracy was created about 150 years ago at a time when most employees were illiterate, when information was very difficult to move, and the best way of moving information was to have a hierarchy where 10 people would report up to a manager who would consolidate that information and report it up the chain of command. And it was also a world in which change was relatively well behaved. Well, that world doesn't exist anymore. And so the challenge is, if you want to build an organization that is resilient and innovative, you have to give people more authority and more power. Now, obviously, there's a risk there. People are nervous when you say you have to dramatically expand the decision rights of those on the front lines. There's a certain degree of nervousness, like, well, what happens if they screw up? Or what happens if we can't trust them? But I think the answer to that is not that difficult. If you want to empower people, one, you have to train them, teach them to think like business people so you can trust them with significant decisions. Number two, you want to give them a financial upside so they really are incentivized to make smart decisions, and they benefit when those decisions work out. Number three, you have to give them context so they understand, the surroundings of the business, who the competitors are, who our customers are, and so on. So, in a way, I don't think anybody really wants to be managed. And yet, we have these ranks and ranks of managers because we haven't given people that business literacy. We haven't given them a proper upside. That we haven't given them the information and the context they need to make smart decisions. Well, those are all things we can change. And when you do it, you find there's an extraordinary amount of initiative and ingenuity in an organization that has long gone unexploited. People will rise to the challenge. And we've seen this in organization after organization. But you're right. One of the first steps is leaders have to recognize that we are really not in control. And in a complex world, we can't be in control. So we really have to trust others and equip others to make decisions in real time close to customers.
Yeah, thank you very much. You also advocated for a new approach of management for nearly 3 decades. Are we now seeing the emergence of this new management paradigm?
There's certainly more companies, more organizations now that I would say are kind of post-bureaucratic, that are part of that vanguard than perhaps 20 or 30 years ago. Bureaucracy as a social system is very deeply embedded. Most organizations around the world are more alike than they are different. Power trickles down, big leaders appoint little leaders, strategy is set at the top. You have ranks of managers who assign tasks and assess performance, but that is beginning to change. In the same way that over the last 20 or 30 years, we've seen kind of an explosion of new business models. We're now starting to see new management models, and companies like Vinci, the huge French infrastructure company, in healthcare with organizations like Birdzorg that runs a network of 16,000 nurses with only a couple of managers. Organizations like Roche, a global pharmaceutical company that has pretty much flattened the hierarchy. So yeah, there are a lot more inspiring examples we can learn than perhaps a couple of decades ago. Having said that, we're still a long ways from really having a fundamental paradigm shift. Most leaders grew up in and around organizations that fit that old bureaucratic template. They're very comfortable there. They've learned how to win in that kind of environment. So it's going to take some more time, but I'm really optimistic that we're on the right path. And part of what makes me optimistic is when I talk to leaders and CEOs, increasingly they will admit that the real challenge for their organization is not the operating model, it's not the business model. The real challenge is the management model. We have too many layers, we're too conservative, we're too slow, we're too inwardly focused. Not all of them, I think, have the courage yet to do something about that, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
I'm happy to hear that. You are quite often mentioning like Birdzorg, as you mentioned, and Hire also. Um, in the Leading Complexity program, earlier we had speakers like Annika Staber and Bill Fisher talk about Hire, and this year we are happy to have Jos de Blok as a participant or a speaker. Do you have any new suggestions for companies that are working this way? Are they popping up, or will we continue
Sure.
talking about those?
No. I think there's certainly a lot to learn from those organizations, but there are others that we can learn from. One of the companies I'll talk about on the program is Ingersoll Rand. This is a 100-year-old U.S. manufacturing company that was at one point put together through a private equity company, and they've rolled out a new model called shared ownership. All of the things I mentioned earlier: financial upside, business literacy, more decision-making power, all of those things they've implemented. They've seen an extraordinary growth in productivity. Every performance measure has gone up. So yeah, we're seeing new companies all the time that are moving in this direction.
That makes me really happy to hear. Great, thank you very much for this interview, and looking forward to see you in the Leading Complexity program this fall. Thank you very much, Gary.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Oh, that was a very interesting talk with Gary you had. He talked about management was innovated 150 years ago. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, I think he's thinking of that management in one way was invented by the first management consultant called Frederick Winslow Taylor. He was operating in the late 1800, something 90 maybe. And he came up with a lot of ideas like dividing people into thinkers and doers. And that was a way of solving the problems they had at that time, because they had a very few percent were actually high educated, while a lot of people were very low educated. I think the average length you spent in school, like here in Sweden, was like 6 years or something like that. So we needed at that time someone who was telling people what to do, because they were challenges with those new machines and all that, and we needed to have highly educated people, but we didn't have that. So that was part of those ideas. And then we had James McKinsey and Alfred Sloan. They were now we're in 1920 somewhere. And they come up with a lot of things we recognize today, such as budgeting, dividing people into departments and having this hierarchy and so on. So I think that is what he is thinking of. And
but that was another time, right? So
yes,
it was more structure, not as complex and dynamic and fluent as today.
and the way we saw other people were more like, okay, you're just a low educated person, you don't know anything, I have to tell you, I'm paying you, so you have to do what I'm telling you, etc. So we didn't really see the full value of people at that time. That is my thinking, at least.
That's where this machine metaphor comes from, right? Where you have people are like cogs in a big machine, and you provide the circumstances and for them, but they are just kind of doing what they're told. So essentially being just resources or cogs in the machine.
Yeah, and also machines was the new big cool thing. So obviously, if you wanted to be on the edge, I think using a metaphor from machines was also kind of attracting to use.
Yeah, and I think it has served humanity very well, actually, because it's created a lot of wealth, a lot of mass production of cheap goods and services. So it has been of service and it has worked. So maybe that is also why it's kind of difficult to let it go.
Yeah, it was great in time where you were a little bit more predictive. You were able to predict a couple of years ahead of you. Not so much was happening, but times are changing. But let's get back to what Gary is talking about. For instance, a quote I have here is, bureaucracy as a social system is deeply embedded. Bureaucracy as a social system is deeply embedded. Any ideas what he means with that?
Yeah, so I think for hundreds of years we have been kind of conditioned to having a functional system where you have managers, we have hierarchy, you have roles, and it also goes maybe beyond business. It's like in church or education, there is this kind of progression, and you have kind of fixed roles which were kind of also an innovation at the time to create stability, create clarity, etc. But by adding more roles, solving problems with the new role and new function, you kind of create a system that is very rigid, and that the system wants to kind of reinforce itself and kind of take on a life of itself to kind of stay alive. But it creates a very rigid system, and it's a social system because it's actually only agreements that are being made up by humans. We think it's very difficult to change, but actually we humans invented it. We came up with like agreements, so it's a social construct and we can change it.
But I think it will take time, because if you look at what the business schools are teaching, I think a lot of them are still into the things that were invented over 100 years ago by James McKinsey and Alfred Sloan and Taylor. And that will, of course, so the managers and the leaders we have today, they have read those books, they have learned about how to run a company in that way. And I think that Gary, what he is saying is that we need to start reinventing management, so we do it in another way, where it's not the machines, it's not cogs in the machinery that we're talking about. We're talking about humans, and then we kind of move things upside down. Instead of saying we have a very intelligent person at the top who is telling everyone what to do, and when everything works perfectly, it's like a machinery. Instead, maybe we do the other way around, saying that we have a couple of people that are serving the customers, as we talked about earlier today, the empowered product teams. And then since they are serving the customers and the purpose of the company, the rest of us, the managers, we need to be serving the people that are serving the customers. And that's just another operating system again.
Yeah, that's creating the environment for that to kind of to grow and to flourish, and for the people in direct contacts with users to perform higher value and take the right decisions.
Yeah.
So what are some of the highlights from the session, from the interview?
Well, I think one of the most important things he's mentioning is actually that he gives us an idea of what is this new management about. And he mentions 3 things that is needed to empower people. And first of all, he's talking about that we need to train them as business people. What are your comments on that one?
Yeah, I think if everyone is having an understanding of the business, if you then you can then take decisions that are really good and viable for the business, but also, as we talked about with empowered product teams, if you're solving, creating value for end users, you can then balance that. So rather than kind of escalating or having information flow up in the organization, you push down the authority to take decisions to empower. And when people have the business understanding, they can take the right decisions.
Yeah, and I think also this is very close connected to the idea of zero distance to the customer, that the people that are serving the customers also are sitting very close to the people. And kind of erasing this idea of dividing people into thinkers and doers or managers and workers, rather thinking of having both thinking time and working time. And maybe that is for everyone.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you talked about in the beginning there, the history and Taylor, and it was natural that you centralized information because at that time there was no transparency. People didn't have access to that information. And of course, if a few people had a good idea, well, we could construct a blueprint for how to do it, set up the operations, and bring in kind of low educated workers to do it. So nowadays, there's no need. Everyone have access to all the information. So then providing the also context around and then the authority to take decisions, you can speed up immensely and take much better decisions.
Yeah, haven't this kind of been a reason for having this idea of dividing people into thinkers and doers, that we only let a few people have the full understanding, and since we are playing that game or having that operating system, that means we can't let the people closest to the customers take decisions because they don't have the full picture. But that is because this is where it becomes a system. We are in that situation just because we have started believing that we have thinkers and doers, and we let the thinkers have more information, and then the doers can't take good decisions. So it all goes around, and that's the system part. I'm thinking, jumping over to the second thing he's now mentioning, this we have to have financial upside. Are we talking about incentives if we reach deadlines here?
No, I think it's more in general terms that people feel ownership, and also that people can take part of the gains, and also typically feel the pains when things are not going as well. So it's not just I think kind of short term bonuses. It's more having that long term, more of ownership. And many companies nowadays, especially in the tech industry, are also working with options that members are actually owners of the company.
Yeah, I know that Hire, they have their idea of micro enterprises. So you're really running a company within your company. And if you serve your customers well, then probably they will pay you more. And if you fail in that, then you probably will not get as much paid. I think it's worth mentioning also that Netflix have kind of another idea of this. Besides, of course, they have stock options and so on, but they also say that you are allowed to spend the money needed as long as you can motivate it for the CEO. And I think that is interesting because it makes people think a little bit extra if they are spending more money than it's actually needed. It's like, okay, can I stand in front of the CEO and really describe why I did this investment? And if you're able to do that, then yeah, you did the right thing.
Yeah, and I think it's also maybe not only the CEO, but if you can in front of your colleagues, like if you have transparency, and then you can argument for why you invest in some things, you can then decentralize it.
Yeah. I think though it's good to really reach the person who have this P&L ownership, the profit and loss ownership. So it's someone that is really hurt if you're spending money in an unwise way. Should we move on to the third thing he's mentioning? He's saying that you need to understanding or spread the understanding of the business environment, like the context where we are working.
Yes.
What are your comments on that one?
Yeah, but I mean, traditionally, if you're working in a function, you might be focused internally into that function, and then it's really a high risk of sub-optimizing. But if you have a broader context, so if you know the situation, customer, market, other departments around you, then you can take decisions that are more optimized for the whole. So considering all the different stakeholder needs, etc., rather than just I'm doing my work in my position and not really caring. And typically that would be a lot of optimization.
Yeah, and this reminds me of Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix. He says that lead with context, not control. And I think, I mean, we have some sort of inner motivation. So play with that instead of telling people what to do and have some carrot and stick thinking in that.
Yeah, so often as leaders, we maybe tend to forget that explaining the rationale, the framing, the setting the stage, explaining why we are going in certain direction, etc., explaining the overall situation. It's easy that you have it in your head, your back of mind, you've been talking a lot about it, and then you say, okay, let's do this. But that's not really motivating, or it can also be a lot of that sub-optimization or decisions that are not going in the kind of best interest of the whole.
Yeah. So to summarize, to be able to empower people, first we need to train them to think like business people, thinking of the cost, the gain, and the pain. So, secondly, give them some sort of financial upside so they feel that they're making the right decision and they feel the pain if they don't. And third, help them understand the business environment. Okay, any highlights that you want to talk about?
Well, I think it's very interesting that there are more and more companies operating in this new way that are coming up and giving us inspiration. So of course we have a lot of kind of tech companies or Silicon Valley examples. And in the last Leading Complexity series, we had the session about Hire, the Chinese company that has kind of really distributed and where you have micro enterprises. And this year we will also have Jos de Blok talking about his experience of leading Buurtzorg, 12,000 people company organized in self-managing teams. And I heard also Gary talking about even more examples coming up. So I think it's a good trend and lots of inspiring examples to learn from.
Yeah, looking forward to hear both Gary but also Jos de Blok and understand better how Buurtzorg is working.
Okay, let's wrap up for today. We are curious to hear about your reflections, so please share your comments below. And if you want to learn more from Gary Hamel, we have invited him for our masterclasses in the Leading Complexity program this fall. So his session will be Thriving in the Age of Upheaval. That's the 3rd of October. and then you have the opportunity to interact and learn from Gary himself. So go to leadingcomplexity.com to get your tickets there, and thanks for listening.
Thank you very much.